What's up, Doc?
Hey, so welcome back to Animation Dissection. So, hey Zorak, remember that time we, as a generation, demanded a reboot of the classic Looney Tunes characters, but not in a way that, is like anything like the originals with humor, interesting animation, or like wit, but I mean like really demanded that the Looney Tunes are like a cipher through which the entertainment industry's cynical cargo cult could be like channeled to target our demographic?
Absolutely. You know what I hate? I hate funny things. I hate creative writing. I hate good characters and funny jokes. You know what I really want, Neeksy? I really want just like really, really bad, boring humor, and generic. It's hip action and just stereotypes. I just love stereotypes and
But
boringness.
Zorak, do you also like anime?
Oh boy, do I ever. If only my American cartoons could also be anime, except worst.
Well, you're in luck, because the Warner Brothers studio has brought us Loonatics Unleashed.
Lunatics Unleashed? Tell me more.
All right, so Lunatics Unleashed was probably one of the worst ideas that has ever been brought to the public, and this was way back in 2005. They put out this teaser video on the internet for Lunatics before it wasn't even called Lunatics Unleashed, and it was actually really, really fucking terrible. I mean, it hit the internet, and I don't think anybody was happy about it. I couldn't find a single defender of it, and it was basically a trailer where, oh, what was it? They had the guy designing the characters, and they look really good. They're really good drawings of the original designs, and then they get covered in this horrible black ink that makes them dark and mysterious, and then Bugs
and relatable by the teens.
Yes, relatable to the kids these days. And he's like, "What's up, Doc?" Like that whole thing. And they're now like they're covered in black with maybe like an accent of color. They're razor sharp. Their eyes are really like squinty, like pointed, angry all the time. And there's no pupils, so like they're even freakier looking. So this hit the internet, and everybody was against it, and there was like I think he was an 11-year-old kid that actually started a petition to just be like, please don't ruin these characters. I really like them. I am your part of your supposed demographic, and I think this is a awful cynical thing. And so they had to, just with this overall horrible reaction, they had to go back and just retool the entire thing. Well, not enough. They didn't retool it to make it a good idea.
Yeah, no.
But they retooled it by they changed the eyes, so they gave him bigger eyes with creepy looking
they
pupils.
became differently creepy rather than like edgy,
Yes.
cool eyes. They just became like, oh god, what happened to your eyes?
Well,
Just
again, this
completely
was the
different.
whole idea of, well, we're gonna make it anime, so we're gonna make the eyes big because that's what anime is, right?
Yeah.
And they also changed the proportions a little bit. Like they're a little bit lankier. They gave them a bit more detail because the original designs were really simplistic. Like they look like Johnny Test level simplistic and sharp and flat. And then they also didn't make their hands into like razor sharp claws like they were before. And then they changed the ancestor character. So all the characters are supposed to be like ancestors in like the 28th century or something
I
like
think
that.
you mean descendants.
Descendants, that's right, Descendants. And they changed it from Buzz Bunny to Ace Bunny. And they changed his voice from being like down here like this, like, yeah,
I'm Batman.
Yes. Yeah, they got rid of that, and then they made him.
They made him
I
just
don't
a
know,
really bad Bugs Bunny impression.
Exactly.
We're just really trying to be vaguely New Jersey, but not. It's just clearly some guy from the West Coast going, I'm from New Jersey, guys. I'm Ace Bunny. What's
Yeah,
up, Doc?
But they made him like sound kind of like an early 20s, like in his early 20s, like college student Bugs
Yeah.
Bunny, essentially, which is what he sounds like.
Oh, and we forgot to mention, folks, they're also superheroes. That's important.
Yes.
And they have supernatural powers.
Yeah. So, like, the idea was terrible. It was met with just complete and utter scorn, but it made it through 2 seasons. And the first season, the reaction was still pretty bad, so they actually had to change the creative director between the 2 seasons, and they retooled the second one to be more comedic. Even though the first one was supposed to be an action comedy as well, it was really not very funny, nor was it very good action, and it was all trying to take itself too seriously, and the whole thing just turned into a tonal mess. And then the later episodes, which turns it into a very generic action comedy, also didn't work either, and it was eventually canceled around 2007. The only really interesting thing I could find about the production was the fact that the character designers for the whole thing were Christian and Yvonne Tremblay, who had previously designed SWAT Cats for Hanna-Barbera.
Which is a more interesting show and a much better designed show, to be sure.
Yeah, and And the other thing with this one is they seem to have a pretty good budget. I mean, it wasn't like poorly animated, but it was still boring and doesn't take the good aspects of anime in any way, shape, or form in terms of composition, design, editing, cuts, action. None of that. It doesn't have
or having some sort of, interesting overlying narrative that you're meant to transport yourself or, insert yourself into. It's just action, supernatural. It's like they took the generic superhero like archetype of like the cartoons that we had for a while in the early 2000s, where you had your generic superhero of the week, and it was actually pretty boring all in all. And then they just layered on some, Looney Tunes-esque crap, and it just became like worse than both, the worse than the 2 parts. It's just, it was really not very good.
So let's go into the basic premise of this, is that, okay, so in the 28th century, sometime like 27, whatever, that sometime around then, a meteor hits what they call the city planet of like Acmeopolis, and the explosion or something about the meteor's like impact
shifts the Earth's axis or something.
Well, no, not even that.
No, they said it. They specifically say that it shifts the Earth's axis, and somehow this opens like dimensional portals and gives people supernatural powers. And by people, I only mean like 5 animal people. Yeah. Why are there animal people here? Yeah, they're the only animal people.
So let's get into that as well. So we'll get into that soon. But so the basic premise is they get random superpowers. They are then assembled into a team that live in a tower with some lady who just shows in on some kind of like.
Let me stop you for a second. They live in an orb in the center of a tower.
Yes.
I don't know why that.
Orb. Yeah. And then also they just get a bunch of random Skype calls from this lady named Zidonia.
Spoilers, she's an alien.
Yeah, none of this, there's no origin episode, really. There's no idea of, like, how they all really came together.
Yeah, the first episode is weird.
The first episode just goes right into it as if we give a crap about any of these characters.
It's so weird because it cold opens, ironically, to a glacier invading the city, and then just go to just, like, the Wile E. Coyote and like Roadrunner inserts going like, oh, cold pizza, where'd you get it? Oh, it was frozen. Ugh. And it's just like,
pizza, radical, tubular.
And it's just like, oh god, no, stop. And then you have Ace Bunny floating in the air with psychic powers holding like
a sword.
A katana. Literally a katana. And he burns, or he heats up the pizza using laser eyes. And it's like, oh, you thought this was going to be cool, but no, it is not.
Oh, and also the Roadrunner character is voiced by Rob Paulson, which is just a complete waste of a really talented voice actor. I mean, all the people that are involved in this, it's just like a waste of talent. Like, what was it? Trace McNeil. I think I heard Tom Kenny in there as well somewhere. It's like, wow, there's some really talented people in here.
And it's not like
it's completely wasted on
them. And it's not like the production looks like half-assed either. I mean, it's boring, in terms of production.
It's boring and not even close to resembling the whole anime aesthetic they were trying to market.
Yeah, and it doesn't look like bad in the sense of like, wow, they had like $5 and like a penny and they managed to make this.
No, it's just boring.
It's just that It's well made. It's just awful.
Yeah. So, and it's hard to give this thing a plot because everything is basically blank of the week in this episode.
Well, there is an overarching plot. To be fair, there is an overarching plot.
But it's so vague and pointless. It's not that major though.
Well, let's just pause and real quick recap what we actually did to actually view this, so we can kind of explain where we're coming from. So we decided rather poorly that we were going to watch this in order to commentate on it, because we're like, it would be nice to watch something that's a bit bad, because we didn't have high hopes going into it. Well, we figured we'd give it a good chance. We first just watched the first episode on our own, and that was just horrendously painful. And so we decided to try watching it with some friends, and I think we picked like 8 episodes, like 3 hours worth. What's that,
from both seasons.
For both seasons, and it was like a few random episodes, and then it was the main plot couple episodes of like the whole thing, like, the alien guy. Spoilers. Well, fucking who cares about spoilers? You're never gonna watch this.
No one gives a shit about the spoilers for this
Warning!
show.
You don't want to watch this. So whatever. Yes. So basically, the whole thing is like Zidania or whatever is an alien lady because her planet got destroyed, and her brother is trying to invade the Earth because. Boo. We actually watched the first episode of the plot, then we skipped the second one of the main plot because we were done by that point.
It didn't matter. And
we were
by
done.
The time they switched it to the second season, the entire premise is, well, now they're in space more often, traveling to other planets.
And they also
starting intergalactic civil wars, which are A-okay.
And by the second season, it was also like they started going, okay, we need to bring in more Looney Tunes references and insert characters. Because the first season barely even had any real basis other than, the animal protagonists are vaguely Looney Tunes-esque.
It referenced a bit from the early Looney Tunes. Where
it has some gags.
Yes, I will. No, I won't. Yes, I will. No, I won't. No, you won't. Yes, I will. But there's no actual consequence.
And there's no real comedic payoff.
You made me say a thing. Like, that doesn't work. The rabbit season, duck season thing works a lot better because it's the third party involved, and it causes a person to be shot.
And it's goofy as hell, and it has the wonderful visuals of the sign.
Yeah, and this whole thing was just, But, I mean, that was the closest it really referenced any of it. I mean, there was really no point to bringing these Looney Tunes characters into it. They could have just, if they wanted to make an animal people, like, action show, they didn't have to even make them references to these other characters. Because, again, their characterization had very little to do with the original characters at all. I mean, they have Wile E. Coyote's character as a protagonist in this. I don't know, like Lola Bunny was only a creation for the Space Jam movie. So, not even that. The Taz character, I think he barely even shows up in even the episode, most of the episodes.
Well, because it's like, what are they going to do with him? He's just incoherent, and occasionally he just solves a problem by being incoherent. He can't be characterized because he has no functional character.
Yeah, and then they have the Roadrunner character talk. So, again, they could have just assembled a team of a bunch of animal characters and just done a show about it without having to basically take these characters that are very much beloved and just shitting all over them, essentially.
And then after that,
nostalgic here, it's completely needless. It doesn't add anything to the show.
And then in the second season, they go, actually, you know what? We need more Looney Tunes reference characters, so let's bring in like future Elmer Fudd and future Tweety Bird. Hey, future Tweety Bird is the prince of a planet, and then he's just horrible, and he shits himself and threatens to shit himself, so the duck has to wipe his ass.
Yeah, and then there's also roided up muscular Sylvester.
Which was probably the only thing I enjoyed in this show, just because it was so fucking stupid.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't enjoying it in the way that they intended you to enjoy it. Yeah. So let's get into the whole animal people thing. So when you look at the aesthetic of this whole thing, and you look at the backgrounds and a lot of the crowd shots, I think there was probably more crowd shots earlier on when they actually seemed to be on the planet, doing stuff.
Well,
the city is pretty much populated entirely by what I would call poor man's Bruce Timm extras.
Yeah,
that's
weird.
They look like they come out of one of the better Batman series, and they're all human. And these animal characters kind of lived with them and had like human jobs. Like they lived in the urban areas, like they worked in like television or at a university or as a pool boy. So it's not like how Bugs Bunny is just a rabbit that lives in a forest and has humans intrude upon him. Like they're mixed into the society, and the characters often make the matter even worse because the villains often pointed out that they're animals for their lame puns, and the background audience and the background population is not also a mixed society. It's all humans. So you now just have these only 5 or 6 characters that just happen to be animals. It's never shown to be a mixed society, and it's then also pointed out constantly. So the universe doesn't really make sense. And now, okay, so if this was going to be in like entirely just a comedy, the social construction wouldn't really be as much of an issue. But because it was trying to take itself seriously in some way, and the holes become a lot more problematic and noticeable. Like you're more likely to want to pick it apart rather than a comedy where you just go, well, it is what it is. The fact that it kept calling attention to it, and the background design and the crowd design didn't reflect the way that world worked, it made it kind of confusing.
Yeah, it was just...
Especially like the flashbacks to before they had powers.
Yeah,
like,
that was just weird because
he's literally just a coyote working in a university with like everybody else around him is human.
Yeah,
like,
there's no real benefit or a real point to them being animals other than like occasionally like a villain, and these villains are like just humans that are just gain random ass powers for unrelated reasons to their gaining powers. The protagonists occasionally reference the fact that they're animals, like the coyote's rival, who is a super genius, calls him a dog as an insult. It's like, oh wait, yeah, that's right, they're animal people. What's up with that? It's kind of it's like, oh, you're just gonna insult him for being a dog man or whatever, and it's kind of just like, but what is even going on with the setting anymore?
Yeah, what is the deal with the premise? And again, it wouldn't have been so bad if they showed that the society was mixed, like, a Who Framed Roger Rabbit situation where, yeah, you look around in crowd scenes, you see toons and humans in there. So they don't stand out, and it just kind of makes sense. You'd think that someone who's just living in that city or world would come across these characters as such an oddity and really would not know how to react.
The thing is, it tries to make itself too grounded for it to make any sense. The whole point of like the Looney Tunes, like original concept with having these goofy, having personified animals doing gags against humans, the whole Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny thing. Like, oh, you'd think, oh, this is kind of morally wrong if it, that Elmer Fudd's trying to kill this clearly sentient entity, to eat him. And it's like, it's a fucking cartoon. Who cares? It's a gag. That's the whole point. It's for the gag. But then they take this, and they take that concept and go, okay, what if we moved 700 years into the future? What would it be like? It's like, okay, you're making this way too grounded, mister. Now this concept doesn't make any sense, and it's just weird now.
And then also have them behave as humans, ordering pizza, living in a standard. It looks like, their rooms look like random people's apartments. Like, one of them worked as a pool boy. One of them was like a stunt actor. Again, like, it's having them live in an urbanity that doesn't really make sense and doesn't really harken back to the original Looney Tunes at all.
Yeah,
and even if they did live in an urbanity, like, at least, what was it, that new one they did, the new Looney Tunes show? Like, it kind of made sense, and they also had other characters be animals and other stuff, so their universe was mixed enough to just let you accept this suburban premise.
Also, well, the new Looney Tunes show also had the exception that it was actually just trying to be a comedy and just used it as a gag in and of itself. I mean...
Yes. And it doesn't make you question it because it's their vehicle for gags.
It's like, why worry about it?
Yeah, exactly. Well, again, that's why the original cartoons work, too, is that they're a vehicle for gags.
Yep.
And whereas, again, this one, because it's taking itself seriously, and as you said, because it's trying to ground itself, which a lot of action and adventure shows often need to have some kind of grounding, especially if they have like a high concept.
Well, especially with like the sci-fi concept, with sci-fi fantasy, they always have, the entire basis of that sort of storyline, that sort of story is that they have this world and they just give, a framework for them to explore these hero stories. I mean, your Bruce Timm comparison was, perfect, I think, because they, this same studio worked on the same sort of DC cartoons, but it also really has that sort of feel. Like, it feels like a Static Shock that just doesn't make sense, or like a Batman Beyond or something, where it's just kind of just like, oh, they're animals now, and it's a comedy. Oh God, why is this happening? It just doesn't make any sense from like and even from the comedy standpoint, like even the same studio worked on stuff like Road Rovers, which was literally the same thing but with like dogs, and that somehow made more sense than this.
Well,
remember Road Rovers?
Well, again, they came up with an explanation for it. They were regular dogs, and they go through some weird machine that makes them, I guess, anthropomorphized, and then lets them do whatever they do. But at least that's explained, and that the universe that
it's just a gag,
grounded in some way. Yeah,
and it's a gag in and of itself. Like the dogs live with like the president, and that sort of thing. It's just like it's so stupid that it's a comedy gag in and of itself.
That's a comedy gag show, and it's again
it's an action comedy that actually focuses on the comedic aspect to the point of not trying to make it have too much emotional angst. Meanwhile, Loonatics...
that was the Animaniacs era, so like that explains that. This was much later, and I think a lot of the creative vision, it was gone. And again, I think all the problems that we have, that we've mentioned so far, and there's more to come, are really just speak to how half-baked the idea was. Just how desperate they were to just reuse the Looney Tunes assets, and just have the most... I don't even know how to explain it. It's just... the saddest and that worst example of executive thinking, because like in a lot of the press they were talking about like, well, it's going to be like anime. It's like anime as fuck, guys. Like, it's going to be great. But like the person's understanding of anime and the way it comes out, it's like it's through the eyes of a 50-year-old white guy. Who just saw an episode of Speed Racer once, and he goes like, yeah, that's what anime looks like, and that's it. Like, it doesn't... It's trying to check all the demographic boxes without actually making any sense.
See, I don't know if it's actually going for the anime type thing, because, like, thinking about it, like, certainly it has some sort of element of, like, that, like, lots of stuff.
Well, they have, like, a sword and the powers.
Okay,
and
they all have...
They tried to...
They're okay. Yeah, there are aspects to that. Like, that was kind of the time. Like, you had that also with, like, say, like Teen Titans at the same time. Also, was really anime-esque. But at the same time, this does feel to me much more skewed towards the DC animated type stuff, where its overall structure of the episodes and the actual like way it explores like these villains feel like they just escaped out of like a DC cartoon, essentially, for the first season anyways, where it's just like, oh, this person had thing happen to him, a guy in supernatural evil power. Oh, how can we beat them? Oh, I know, let's find some creative way to use our powers to beat them. And it's basically that's it, except that it adds this comedy that just doesn't really match with that at all, at least in terms of how it's executed. It doesn't balance its two approaches well at all, because it tries being goofy, but then it tries making this kind of grounded sci-fi. Well, not really grounded in terms of like being serious.
Well, they're trying to do dark-ish, but it's the most thinly superficial form of dark or edginess that they could.
They're trying to intermix comics and comics, and it's not working at well. They're not doing the two halves of them justice. I mean, there are ways to do that and make it work, but you have to actually have a consistent tone.
Well, here's the other issue is, as you were saying, like, oh, well, we need to come up with creative solutions to solve our problems. They actually really don't.
No, they don't.
That was the big complaint I remember that we had when we were watching this, is like, none of the action has any purpose. There's no such thing as cause and effect, and action sequences are pretty much just a series of explosions put in for the sake of like having action itself, or just giving the characters chances to show off gadgets or powers, but it never really has any effect on the plot or the task at hand. It's just one thing happens, then another thing happens, and the link between the two is just barely causality at best.
Well, it's like,
and there's just there and then added to that, there's no sense of danger, because with the exception of like Duck, the Daffy Duck one, who's the pratfall relief character pretty much, like in every single episode. I don't think he ever really has a redeeming episode. Essentially, the main
we
cast
just
are
skip
almost,
over a lot though, so who
well,
knows?
yeah, but the main cast though are never really in moments of real danger, and if they are, like a new gadget or device is just comes out of Deus Ex Machina, just for their use. Like it just goes like we almost had a problem there. Like we almost had conflict or something.
Yeah, there was always some sort of
have any stakes in the game.
Yeah.
There wasn't.
Yeah, it's weird because it's kind of like the whole like sort of thing we were talking about when we were going over like Kill la Kill, where it just kind of is like, oh, ass pull, ass pull, ass pull. Oh, villains are ass pulling. Oh no, time for us to pull out another ass pull. And that can work from a comedic standpoint. If that's the thing, is that you're doing it for the purpose of the gag, that's fine. But none of these are supposed to be funny. They're just presented as, isn't this cool? Isn't this hip? Like the sequence
here we got these new hover bikes with laser action, and I got this like flamethrower thing that tech made for us. It's like it's like how a child, like when let's say you give an elementary school kid a pencil and paper and say like, come up with your ideal treehouse, and the kid will be all like, here's the treehouse, and then here's the basement, and it has a whole bunch of cars and a super pony unicorn, and also we have all the money in the world, and also it's like that. It feels like I am watching something that was written by a small child or a fanfic writer that just keeps on giving its characters new shit rather than making the narrative kind of like a puzzle for the characters to solve using what they have.
Yeah, that's one of the things that doesn't really work compared to like, say, normal like the comics action or like, anime stuff that has a similar sort of, narrative. It's usually like, okay, we gave our protagonist some set of powers or limitations.
Yes.
Okay. We're going to set him up against this problem that would be very difficult for him. How is he going to apply his powers to save the day? It's kind of like the whole like, okay, so Spider-Man has to defeat this spooky monster thing. How the hell is Spider-Man going to use his webs and his cunning smarts and gagginess to, beat up this dude? And it's like, oh, that's interesting. That's why we're watching it, because we want to see how the hell he's going to pull this off. And then the
characters have to have limitations to overcome.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what actually makes it like interesting action-wise, in that it's just basically them struggling. And like you said, there's stakes. There was no stakes here. It's just basically just okay. Like the first episode was a really good example of this. It's like, oh no, robot Vikings. Oh, they're on their Viking ship. Okay, we're going on our jet bikes. Oh, our jet bikes got blown up. Oh, they combined into a boat. Okay, let's launch a torpedo. Oh, their boat took up into the air. Okay, our boat can fly now.
Our arms don't work, but Taz spinning around suddenly does. It's just, and there's no explanation for why one works or why one doesn't. They just keep coming up with new devices that they didn't reference existing beforehand. We create them again. It's literally Deus Ex Machina.
Oh, we got these Vikings the robot Vikings are generating cold. The only way we can beat them is by programming them so they generate heat, and they'll die. And it's like, what?
And also, why the robot Vikings there's no motivation for them.
Well, they're from another dimension, and they're Vikings, and they want to, it's such a shitty first episode. Like, if this is like their pitch, it's like, Jesus Christ, guys. Usually the first episode is like the best episode of a thing. Or
just set up the basic villain versus the heroes. It's like even Power Rangers, in the first episode of that shit, they set up who's the good guys, who is the main villain, while also sending them the blank of the week at the same time. So now you have the overall structure is now defined by the first episode, as well as a taste of what the rest of the episodes to come will be like, essentially.
I mean, you set up the setting.
Doesn't even bother with that. And it's almost like the show thinks that not showing the cards of I guess in the last 2 episodes of that first season where they go, oh, suddenly now we do want to have continuity, it just never gets there. And again, I think a lot of this is also because it's very Western in that it doesn't want to have a strict continuity. I mean, it's only been recently that we've started seeing any American produced shows that are made for kids or animated that have some kind of strict continuity, like Adventure Time, Steven Universe, Avatar, all that stuff. I mean, we haven't had that for a very long time. I mean, most of the cartoons we grew up in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s was all this type of show where it was meant to have a lot of rebroadcasting on other networks and
that's not necessarily
American.
the case because like with like say the DC cartoon animated universe that always had continuity. It's just that usually it was episodic continuity where the actual threads between weren't all that important. You know,
Yes.
there is continuity. But it's not so tightly bound that it's necessary to catch them in order. Though, to be fair,
That's
you know,
true.
something like Adventure Time, you know, there's continuity there. But if you watch something from season 3 and then something from season 1, you're not going to be like, what the hell is going on here necessarily?
Well, I think more recently now. I mean,
okay, they've really been pushing it in the most recent season. I'll give you that, but but that's not necessarily the case. I mean, even like say go back like in the 90s, like from a comedic standpoint, Freakazoid of all things had continuity, though that was also treated as a gag, and that thing just literally violated like every possible wall in glorious fashion. But you know, that had continuity. Not that it really mattered, but, you know, it's just kind of like, I don't know if that's necessarily the issue here.
No, because that's a comedy as well. And again, this show never really figured out, I think, what it wanted to be. It didn't understand. I don't think it understood what its tone, and in the end, it ends up having almost no tone. It's kind of like the two opposite waves hitting each other and canceling each other out. It's like that in this case. It wasn't, it wasn't dedicated to being a pure comedy, and it wasn't dedicated to being, pure action.
It wasn't interesting enough to capture both things because I think it really like feels like, as you were saying, like it was made by like committee. We're like, okay, we would like to make it an action thing. Okay, we want to do a franchise that we have rights to already that we feel will have a cultural impact that people will buy in. It's like, okay, we don't want to give
cultural capital.
Yeah, we don't want to pay into like giving more money to DC in order to do stuff because we have to pay them money.
And we don't want to come up with our own idea because we want to use the existing characters as a launch pad for
the marketing
and rather than taking a risk on creating something new. Because that, again, is a risk, and people in charge of this type of thing aren't really interested in risk.
Yeah, so they're essentially going, okay, so we want to do this. Okay, we're going to make it Looney Tunes. So we'll make an action comedy. Action comedies are a thing, right? And then they just pile it on, and they try doing what they would think would be an action, quote-unquote, comedy, including Looney Tunes and all these elements, and it just doesn't work as assembled. They could have gone really hard into the comedic standpoint. I don't know if they could have actually really gone into the action standpoint without it just making no sense at all. But I mean, I guess they could have just been like, literally Batman, but with the Looney Tune characters and just not really had much of a comedic element to it at all. I guess if they wanted to. I don't know why.
Well, the way they tried to market it was the whole edgy, dark, action-oriented thing. I mean, again, I'm looking just purely at the framing in which the company itself was trying to get people.
Yeah,
the show,
I mean, I guess
it's kind of important in a way of trying to understand how it was trying to either succeed or fail by that. I think it was being sold to a lot of people as this action, dark, adventurous.
I wonder if the pushback was why they made it more comedic. I
think it was why they tried to make it more comedic.
I mean, what
was the pushback?
I'm trying to think what it would be like if they had tried making it more action.
The trailer, I think.
Yeah.
The trailer they released was them trying to do it. I'm not saying that the show would have been good.
No,
if
I don't
they
think
did it
either.
But maybe it at least would have.
It may have been been better.
At least it might have been better because then it wouldn't have just turned into boring blandness.
Yeah, I mean, it
might have been stupid. It was going to be stupid, I think, no matter what. But maybe if they had really gone all in to like the action aspect, they probably could have come up with something like somewhat decent in terms of just spectacle. Versus this, it's boring even in a spectacle sense.
See, the thing is, I don't know if they had like the wherewithal to even double down on action. Just because even if they had focused on the action, the fact that they're using the Looney Tunes as the protagonist, they have to include comedic elements and like references. They have to add that because otherwise, it's like, what's the point? Everybody would bail after the first episode. They have
I don't think they had that thought either.
No, I think they had to. Well, I think like, when they do like references, like in the first episode, it's just like purely just trying to dial it in. It's like when like they do remakes of like modern remakes of like old movies and stuff. Like say the Star Trek remakes. Like I don't know if you've seen those at all or even know anything about Star Trek.
Well, no, I know of Star Trek. I just didn't feel like watching those movies.
Yeah, certainly. I cannot blame you with that. But it's like kind of like they throw in as many possible references as possible to every single moment has a reference, and it's not like they're just making it. That's the joke. Or like that's the point is reference.
It's not self-aware.
It's just trying to hit as many like, oh, I've heard of this thing before, and that's trying to cash in on the cultural capital. So they had to have add references and exploited it more than just the physical design if they actually made it. And in order for them to cash in on that, they would have had to have had comedic elements. Now maybe it would have been more actiony and slightly comedic. Like maybe they would have gone like I don't know. From their initial pitch, I got the feeling that it would have been like Teen Titans with like Looney Tunes or something. And I don't know. That may not have been bad because Teen Titans wasn't terrible.
Yeah,
I mean, that was actually pretty decent.
A lot better than I expected. And yeah,
I mean, it wasn't wonderful, but it was okay. Though, I don't know.
The premise of this, I think the idea was bad. I mean, and again, a lot of what you're talking about, I think, goes into something I've always been very interested in, is essentially why we can't have nice things given the system in which a lot of this is created. So, I mean, I define executive thinking as being a cargo cult, or the correlation equals causation, or post hoc ergo propter hoc, meaning one thing happens because of another. So a lot of these companies are run by business people who have a lot of education in finance and marketing and things like that. And the way those programs are often taught is reading a lot of Hayek, and they're very data focused. So they kind of have this odd belief that they can assemble enough data and demographics and things like that. They can kind of use that to predict the future of some sorts. So the only problem, though, is that when there is an exception to it, they don't see it coming. And you can use that chart to trace backwards to explain something, but you can't use that to predict the future. So let's say you have a stock that has started to plateau. The past data is not going to tell you when it's going to start going down. There's no way the past data will tell you exactly when, but that doesn't really dissuade them. So But this is how they're taught to think. This is how they're taught to make decisions.
And it doesn't make any sense here because this is a creative work. It's going to succeed on its creative basis. I mean, without some sort of creative vision or some sort of creative thought or understanding of how
humanity
or how, like, say, the medium works, you're just going to be shoveling shit out the door. And yeah, maybe sometimes people buy into it. I mean, Transformers, the films, that sort of thing. But
this process that barely even works for finance. So it doesn't even work half the time in the financial world that they're brought up in and educated in. And I mean, my experience with a lot of the MBA, program people, often not very cultured, and there's a culture within, that type of business schooling, which is very, anti-humanities, again, very much geared towards this type of data analysis. And the thing is, a lot of those people that, do Wall Street stuff, they're the people that invest in our TV shows and movies. And if you're a producer and you want to get money for your project, you have to convince the people with the money to give it to you. Well, how do you convince them to invest in what you're doing? You assure them that it's a safe investment.
Yeah.
Well, what's the type of thing that reassures these people? Data. Well, what kind of data do we use? We use focus groups, and we use demographics, and we use historical data, as in what's the current trends. And there's all sorts of problems with that type of data already. Focus groups in general have a lot of psychological issues within them, both personal psychology and social psychology, that often renders the data that comes out of those things entirely meaningless. So I think there was a recent article that someone posted about, I think it was someone who was working on that Green Lantern animated series. He talked about the focus testing behind that. And there's some interesting stories behind that. But unfortunately, those are also not uncommon stories in that you have the people who are proctors for this type of thing. They have their own biases. But also the people within the focus group are, one, they're aware of the fact that their ideas are being evaluated. That already ruins the kind of the purity of that data. Because once you start having someone being aware of the fact that their ideas and that their opinions are being, documented, they're going to start wanting to adjust what they're saying to appeal to the other person or what they think the other person wants to hear. And then not only that, you're now sticking them inside of a group. And now you have groupthink in there. So people will sometimes come to a conclusion that no individual agrees with because they all assume that other people have an intended goal in mind, even though no one vocalizes it. So you have this situation where no one can truly be honest because once you become aware of the fact that you're in a focus group, you're not able to think in a pure way. You're not actually getting someone's genuine thoughts. You're having them kind of being spoiled a bit. So not only is the idea of using data to try to predict success and failure in a creative industry really, I think, wrong-headed, the data itself that they're using is really unreliable. So it's wrong on both sides of it. I don't think there's a good way of doing this. But again, the fact that this will fail never really kind of changes the thinking behind doing this type of system. I think especially because even when something is kind of like a bomb or a flop, they still make enough money in the ancillary market so that there's very little consequence to it. Something that doesn't do well here, the Rio movie doesn't do very well here, but it does really well internationally. So they could kind of make something that isn't all that good and doesn't make its money back, from the market in the U.S., just selling it off to other countries, which doesn't really, in terms of distribution, the studio itself is not in charge of that anymore. It's now someone else's problem. They already got their money from selling that off. And you just sell it to a whole bunch of other ancillary markets. You get the, the McDonald's tie-in toys and all this other money coming in. You can make something that's not all that good, but still make enough of a profit that people go, our system worked.
Yeah, and the thing is that usually with the studio kind of approaches this is that, okay, they look for, as you said, what is the safest bet? But that has no real bearing to creative works at all, because that's what drives this sort of things. Like, if you look at something like Adventure Time, which is massively, massively successful, how could you have predicted that would have been successful other than by looking at how it's being received and actually looking at the creative people involved with it,
or having faith in it?
Even that was really that one even didn't take off for the longest time because they had the pitch, and how long was it between the pitch and the pilot and it actually coming into existence? It was quite a while.
Adventure Time is special because it was Nickelodeon had the rights to it for a few years before they were able to even shop it around to another network. And then Cartoon Network jumped on it as soon as they had the chance.
Well, because they looked at the reception.
Well, not only that, I think also the difference is that recently Cartoon Network has had a lot of talent development inside the company, and they've been kind of fostering a lot of the people who work on the various shows internally will then present new shows to them. They don't bring in a whole bunch of outside and Penn Ward had worked on a bunch of their other shows in the meantime. And again, also Fred Seibert really believed in the show, and he was like, I'm going to repitch it as much as I can. Mm-hmm. There was a faith in the idea that this will pan out if you let us do what we want. And they also, not only did they give him the show, they gave him a lot of creative freedom on that show. I mean, he gets away with doing a lot of stuff that normally, and I'm not talking about in a, edgy, swear word type of way. I think just the type of material.
Well, and the type of narratives and stuff that they're able to get away with.
Everything he's doing, And you really only get that in rare cases when someone who happens to be in charge gives a crap about the artists. Historically, this has happened a few times. The Who Framed Roger Rabbit movie was in big trouble production wise for a while, and there was going to be a huge amount of executive interference at the time. And it wasn't until I think it was Katzenberg, who had recently been brought into Disney at the time. He was like, "No, don't interfere with this. Have faith in Zemeckis and all these other people to, they can do it. Don't interfere with, don't get too many cooks into the pot, essentially." And then it succeeded. It did, it's what brought back the Disney animation, second golden age, essentially, was after Who Framed Roger Rabbit. And it took this one person who was high up enough and had communication with the artists and had faith that, yes, it might look bad on the outside, it might look bad demographically. We haven't done a animated feature in a while, and they weren't doing well for a while, but I think this will work because I believe in what we're creating.
Yeah.
And that is rare. And sometimes that will fail, but it also means that it'll succeed. And when it does succeed, it becomes a cultural touchstone, I think. And it has a lot more staying power as a kind of cultural canon than something that might be a flash in the pan success that might, reach the demographics. I think a lot of these superhero movies that are coming out, they might be really popular now, but I think 5-7 years, we're really not going to remember a lot of those movies.
See, well, that's debatable to some degree, but I think like an interesting comparison is like with say, look how what Disney did when they actually, or not Disney, like Nickelodeon did when they realized that they had Avatar so popular. They gave quite a lot of leeway with their actual they had a lot of censorship and crap on it, but they had a fair bit of leeway and it had a chance to go pretty long. And then it's like, okay, this is insanely popular. People are really excited for it. We are not going to give the necessary support to the people producing it to create the new series at all. And then they just basically, they dash their own baby that had been making them a lot of money on the rocks because they're like, oh, we're not going to really have any faith in you. We're just going to play it as safe and low end as possible, and basically just ruin them, because by not putting any faith into them, they've ruined the production and overall just ruined the entire thing. It's like Avatar was going to be a huge ass franchise, and it's kind of actually just killed it as a franchise.
It's petered out. I mean, well, Nickelodeon, I think right now is kind of struggling to get new voices in. I think they had kind of just a period of time where they also started abandoning a lot of their animation wing to do more live action stuff. I mean,
well,
even
it's
Cartoon
cheaper.
Network for a while. Well, even Cartoon Network for a while was starting to do that. Although I think it's kind of finally given up the ghost on that and just switched back to their animation wing. And
well, it's also because their animation wing they gave them more freedom, and their animation wing is just kicking ass.
I think there's been some good. I think there's been some good decision makers at Cartoon Network about, again, fostering an environment where a lot of these artists can create new things, and they often work on each other's shows, and these people are able to generate ideas. It's basically developing the talent base inside the company to kind of create a creative think tank that will last them longer than if they just do these demographic things constantly. And again, they might have it's a difficult thing because I don't think there's any surefire way to have success, but at least I think things are more interesting when the people in charge stand behind what is being made rather than trying to be safe all the time. I think safety and complacency is kind of the enemy of making something good and creative.
See, the weird thing is that almost immediately after Loonatics Unleashed ended, they I don't know how Warner Brothers, animation is subdivided, but Warner Brothers then went on from that to making, say, Batman, the Brave and the Bold, which was weird as hell in a good way. I don't know if you're familiar at all with Batman, the Brave and the Bold.
I'm trying to. I mean, there's been so many.
That's the one. That's the one
reboots.
That's the one that goes for kind of the really hammy version of it, where it's just Batman teaming up with guys and it's just goofy and just has lots of.
Was it the one where Joker had dreadlocks?
No.
Okay. Well, again, I can't remember which one anymore. There's been so many.
No. That's like the Batman the Brave and the Bold is the one where he looks like the old 1950s Batman, and it's the gaggy one where they, for example, have an episode where it's literally just an actual Batman convention. And it's like literally like they have like Batmite and just like gags. It's just like all just hammy as whatnot. They have a wonderful little thing that you can find on YouTube of Aquaman in like a 1950s like family sitcom like thing. With them it's just like it's goofy as hell. And it's like and these gags. And it's like this is such a risk. And it's like, and they went from doing like Loonatics, like I don't know if it was the exact same, similar teams at all, or even like Warner Brothers.
But it's the same company.
It's the same company, and it's like you would think like pitching this, it's like how the hell did they get away with doing this? And it's like this is funny as hell, and it's like this you wouldn't think this would go well, it'd be sellable to kids, and they ended up making like 3 seasons, like in like 65 episodes of it, and it's like Jesus Christ, guys! It's like you went from Lunatics to this.
They have. I think
I like to pause
to have talented people. I just don't think they're.
Well, even from the executive
managed right.
Well, you think from an executive standpoint, it just kind of was like, whoa, guys, you guys are taking risks all of a sudden. I mean, and I would like to just pause and say, like, it is worth actually checking out this Batman series, because even though it's definitely something for kids, it has a lot of really weird, like, just funny stuff that is clearly aimed at like a broader, the people who just get comics. Like check out some of the clips on YouTube. It's like it's funny, some funny shit in there. But it's kind of just like it's weird because you get these ideas like, where are these executives coming from? Because they just pop up and just ruin things, and then they go away and they just have great things come out. And it's like, why are you even letting these people near like the driver wheel? I don't know.
I mean, it's strange, but I mean, again, I think shows like Loonatics are kind of like the epitome, I think, of the type of thinking that I was describing, and that it was using a safe franchise. It was trying to do all this kind of demographic checkboxing of what they thought was on trend, and again, I remember looking at the press releases and an interview with the executive behind it, going like, "Oh, we're updating them to today's kids and youth." It's like, it's that episode of The Simpsons with Bucci, but it's real. And the sad thing is the reason that episode is so good is because things have not changed all that much from what it was making fun of. No. I mean, it's still very much that. I mean, maybe the specifics of it, where like, surfers and skateboarders and things like that, that's no longer kind of what's considered the cool thing per se, but the intent behind it and the creative process, or the process behind it, that hasn't changed. It's still this kind of empty-headed acquiescence to trends.
But at the same time, though, like when they do make a creative effort, and create like a Freakazoid, like Freakazoid was great, but I'm pretty sure it was actually a failure in the sense of like popularity. Like I'm sure they probably went down on it, actually were at like a loss with Freakazoid in terms of overall popularity. And I love
it was on the wrong network, and audiences hadn't gotten used to having cartoons in that style for that kind of age demographic that had gotten onto it. I mean, if something like Adult Swim had existed for a lot longer, and if more cartoons were kind of have been like that, it would have succeeded. Basically, I think what Freakazoid needed was to have another Freakazoid before it. I don't think the network it was on was targeted to the right demographic of people that would end up watching it and liking it.
Yeah,
I mean, it was on the WB, and its time slot was where all the other shows for much younger kids were. I don't think. I mean, Animaniacs, I'm surprised how much it got away with in terms of references and some of the jokes in there. I'm like, I don't think most of the kids who watched it got half of what was being said.
But it was funny, so it didn't matter.
It was still funny. Whereas Freakazoid, it was doing a lot of meta humor that I don't think 6 to 8 year olds are the types of people that will really get most of what Freakazoid was doing. But it didn't also have the kind of general style of Animaniacs per se. And again, it was in the time slot for the same marketing as if it was made for 6 to 8 year olds. But Freakazoid, I think, was much better than that. Not better, but I think it had a much wider range of demographic, but the network it was on was not equipped to support it. It's much like Mission Hill was an amazing show. It was just, it's on the WB, which was not the network to support a show of that style with that type of depth and things like that.
But
It just wasn't the right network. It doesn't mean the show is bad. It was just not marketed correctly. There wasn't a framing in which people would kind of be into that or think to watch it.
but that doesn't actually matter, though. I mean, that's very true. That's true. But from a purely, like an actual standpoint of where they actually approaching it from, it was a risk. It was a risk they took,
Yes.
and they lost. That's
Yeah.
the thing, and that comes up. You can make.
They're called risks for a reason.
Yeah, the thing, you can make huge gains on it, but you also have the possibility to make huge losses on it. At the same time,
But that's also why you don't bet everything on one thing you're doing.
But that can also be an issue, though, because why aren't they making modern day Looney Tunes in the sense of like the old style? Because it's a lot of money to actually produce that at that level of quality, and they're not willing to try to push, to make the niche where that actually can exist and have a lot of, oomph where they could try making their money back on it. That's a huge, financial, entry level.
Well, also, where would they show them? Again, those things were originally made as a part of going out and watching a feature film. I mean, back then you had
Warner Brothers is a studio, Neeksy.
Well, no, I understand, but the thing was that culturally, when people went out to movies, they were used to seeing both a newsreel and a cartoon, both either from Fleischer, Warner Brothers, Disney, all these other studios. That was kind of culturally just the normal thing. Any movie, whether it was a serious movie or a kids movie. Now they only do shorts in front of kids movies, and even then, a lot of the time is filled up with advertisements and previews. I mean that's advertising. I mean, there didn't used to be like film, TV style advertising before movies.
True.
That was not really common, and that's filled up a lot of that time slot already. If they had to add a Merry Melodies or Looney Tunes thing in front of every single feature film.
God, imagine if they did, though. Imagine how great that would be.
Would be great.
Would you go out to more films to just see the new Looney Tunes? I would.
But
do it, Warner Brothers.
Well, again, but that's the issue. What I'm talking about is just because something is made and is really good, if it can't find its audience either through the cultural framing
or by
shaping
the audience,
or just being on the right network and in a place where people can watch it, it's just not going to be found. It's kind of like when someone says a book is ahead of its time, or a painting is not appreciated until much after. It often takes some kind of cultural change for people to then appreciate these things. But that's my long-term theory.
But taking a risk, you can set those types of cultural trends, though. That's the thing. If Warner Brothers were to decide now, all of a sudden to start doing that, like before every one of our new films, we are going to have a Merry Melody, and we're going to actually take the time to produce these and put a budget, because we think that this will get more people into the theaters. And more people to actually see our films. We'll build up brand Warner Brothers, support. I mean, if they did that, it would be a huge risk. And maybe there'd be a reward, but there'd also be the potential for loss. But that drives a lot of these sort of mindsets, is that the fear of loss.
Well, again, at least it'd be an interesting loss. But again,
they don't care about that, though. They only care about the bottom line.
They don't care about culture.
Why would they take a risk when they can go for the most generic baseline thing and the little risky thing and make the least little bit of cost, as long as they don't take any sort of loss?
As long as they do better than breaking even. And a lot of times doing the same thing over and over again will let you do better than breaking even. But I think what happens is every once in a while someone will come up with the thing that becomes the big trend next. It's like looking at what's been all those movies? It's like the Hunger Games thing. Mm-hmm. Like once I think maybe Hunger Games isn't the one that started it, but I'm saying
Harry Potter would be the one that started that.
Harry
trend.
Potter,
the young adult sort of fantasy story that takes off and it has a series. That is kind of the Harry Potter started that.
I'm talking about something even more. There's something even more specific about the young adult trend that I'm talking about. That's like a much more generalized one. I'm talking about where you are literally setting up these. It's like what's the newest one? Divergent. It's very similar in concept. I mean, I think Harry Potter is kind of like a proto version of it.
Yeah.
But we've suddenly, I think, also the Stephenie Meyer stuff, the
Twilight.
The Twilight stuff. I mean, also look at how hugely hugely financially successful that was. And I think that is what kicked off a lot of what we're seeing now in both Divergent and Hunger Games and things like that. But again, someone set the trend, and those people become very popular. They become the toast of Hollywood, and they're given kind of the legitimacy. But that takes a risk to do that. I think the idea of appealing to a primarily female audience is kind of, well, it's sadly a radical idea. It shouldn't be a radical idea, but it is in modern Hollywood. That is considered a radical idea, But that has gotten them a lot of money. I mean, again, I hate to call it, my feminist side is really sad at saying that, appealing to women, how could that possibly be profitable? Well, it is, but that thought process had not really existed in Hollywood until recently.
I mean, and you've seen with Warner Brothers, like most of the stuff that their animation does produce is ultimately tied into some sort of existing franchise that they own the rights to. And the thing is that as of late, since Loonatics Unleashed, they have been taking, a lot more effort and actually putting some sort of creative minds into it. But they're still based off of, existing franchises almost always. I mean, look, the new Scooby-Doo cartoons are actually really funny and good. I don't know if you've actually seen any of them.
Well, I liked the newest one, the Mysteries Incorporated one.
Yeah, then that was also by Warner Brothers, and I mean that had some sort of creative minds.
That had a plot. That actually did have a direct episode to episode order.
Yeah.
That's what made that in. I mean, again, and again, it had critical acclaim, but I don't think the networks were either equipped to market the show, and I don't think a lot of people. I think especially in the US right now,
it had a 52 episode run for like 3 seasons, which is pretty good for a series. I mean, I think after that, that's fine. I don't consider that a failure or like, why did you screw up here? And it's like, no, it's fine.
I'm talking about just I'm talking about in terms of like I agree that it was culturally an interesting and a good show itself, but I'm talking about purely on the financial side of it. The financial side, and again, if something is successful, other people will start imitating it.
Yeah.
Versus if it doesn't do well financially, then people will be more adverse to taking that type of risk again. So that's why I think a lot of people really want certain shows to do well, because then they hope to see other studios take that similar kind of route. And I think that often sometimes causes fandoms to wish a show that happens to be bad to be. They want it to be good so much that they end up kind of inflating it a bit.
Yeah, I mean, but it seems like with Warner Brothers, they've been doing some creative stuff with things, but only with existing franchises. I mean, like the new Looney Tunes that they actually made was pretty decent. There's some pretty good.
That one's just got canceled though.
Well, that happens again.
Yes. So, but I mean, again, they were doing something interesting, and they were. In the style of the show.
I mean it had 50. That also had 50 episodes, so that's not terrible. But
yeah,
I mean that was a pretty decent. I wouldn't say it's quite at the levels of the original. Merry Melodies and such. It's certainly not that kind of comedy either.
No, but
for what it is,
on trend.
Yes,
it felt very. I mean, and I mean, I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean in the sense that they looked at the type of humor that a lot of people are used to right now. And I think they kind of tailored a lot of it to that. They were able to get a little bit more subversive with things that the originals are very kind of straightforward. And the Looney Tunes stuff had a lot more stuff with implied humor and things like that. I mean,
they also had a lot more references and kind of like setting sort of humors rather than gags. They're less jokey, whereas like the original Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies are more like, they're kind of like stand-up.
Yes.
Where it's basically just like boom, 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 gag, 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 gag. We're done.
Yeah. I mean, even plot-wise, some of the Merry Melodies just end in, they sometimes end very abruptly, and you go like, well, that didn't really end. It ends on a joke, but
that is that in itself is a gag, and it's like, oh.
Yeah.
I mean, when we watched this, it was so bad. We ended up watching the Dover Boys.
Oh, yeah.
Immediately afterwards.
Well, as our palate cleanser.
Yeah.
as the one thing to keep the gun off of our temples, essentially.
And it is just like blows your fucking mind, like how much, like compare like whatever episodes of Lunatic Unleashed, like or whatever. When we watch the Dover Boys, it's like, oh my god, this is so good. This is just perfect. It is literally perfection. And from a purely comedic standpoint, and it's like it doesn't need the stupid action stuff, and it doesn't need. You could just have people just writing gags and animating it. Like that's fine. You can have that. It's great.
Well, think about also the time period in which it was existing. The type of micromanagement was not really a big thing back then.
True.
That just wasn't a part. Yes, they had managers, but it was not the level of tinkering and interference that we have today. As things have become a lot more data based and assembly line style, that type of thing doesn't happen anymore, or very rarely. But again, like I think that's why a lot of people started looking to the internet as a possible outlet for people to make content outside of that system of a lot of tinkering. You'll get a lot of crap, but every once in a while you'll get something that is completely out there but is really good because it came outside of that system. A lot of these projects would not be able to be made or see the light of day if they were developed in a studio environment. So there is, I think, hope in that regard, but I think at the same time I'm a little bit wary as places like YouTube are increasingly kind of co-opted by the same types of market forces and the network interference that television has over time.
Well, but
and it's happened very quickly too.
It's not like going counter to what audiences enjoy is necessarily to the benefit of like a studio. The reaction that Adventure Time had initially online and its huge reception. Even that was heavily driven by like just outright piracy for the longest point. Like, oh, people are downloading this short we made a ton. People are really into this. And then I'm sure, Cartoon Network probably noticed this after Disney wasn't taken up. Kind of like, oh.
You mean Nickelodeon?
Well, Nick didn't take it up, though.
Well, I think you said Disney for a second.
You're right. Yep. Well, you're right. I keep on mixing them up. But, it's like Cartoon Network probably just noticed. I can't say that they did, but I would think that they probably would have noticed that if they were smart and go, oh, this is pretty popular. We should probably pick this up. You would think it's not like it's to their benefit to kind of not pay attention to what people actually enjoy that's creative and original to try to, ride that wave.
Yes.
It's not to their advantage not to do that, but.
Well, at the same time, though, with Adventure Time, though, the time it was a big smash hit was quite a few years before it was ever picked up. So they could have just looked at it and go, well,
how much of that was driven by Nick, though?
Well, yeah, but even then, like how much I think Cartoon Network made a smarter decision than just saying this was really popular. I think they were like, we looked at what he's done on a lot of the shows they have done. He had worked on Flapjack.
Yep.
Penn Ward. They had seen what he's been able to do, and they, also looked at Adventure Time, the original pilot, which is way different. That is way different than what the show ended up being like.
Yeah, a little bit.
It's quite. I think it's quite different. Especially when you look at
it's a little less. It's a little less irrelevant. Certainly, the first episode is a little or the pilot's a little monkey cheese, and it grounds itself a bit more. But yeah.
Yeah, again, but I think they had good decision makers and people who are able to spot something that is interesting. It's like I think it's what a good editor kind of is able to see something that's interesting and has potential. Outside of just looking at. Yes, you consider popularity, but I don't think that should be the only metric in which you measure something. And I think that it would be nice if there were a lot more people in charge who are able to take a much more broad view of the things they're supposed to evaluate and acquire. I think sticking either one to data and two to entirely on, risk and willy-nilly is not necessarily a safe way of doing things. I think, understanding the usable aspects of both. I think that's and it's a lot harder to define that. It's a lot harder to make a surefire way of that balance. But I think that is possibly, a better way of going about things. So, anyway, so Loonatics Unleashed, terrible show.
Don't watch it.
Don't watch it. It's not even fun in a train wreck sense.
Yeah, because we tried it. It was just painful and like boring, and it made me want to go take a nap.
It's like I took Tylenol PM or something.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a good understanding of that. In terms of other things we've been watching, let's see. Ping Pong is something that you should definitely be watching.
Ping Pong, the animation is incredible.
Ping Pong, the animation's amazing. And Masaki Yuasa has now also directing an episode of Adventure Time,
which I'm pumped for.
I mean, and it looks absolutely beautiful, and it's going to be really interesting, I think. And then let's see, JoJo's still doing really well. David Production, I think, has found its footing so far.
The pacing is a little on the slow side, just a little, but I wish it would kind of pick up. But I mean,
yeah, but the visuals have been
it's been great and it's been a lot of fun. But it's I mean, to some degree, it's kind of hard for them to rush it because it is a little episodic. The story is at this point.
Yeah,
but it's a little kind of just like, okay, guys, please speed it up a little bit. But Mushishi has been amazing.
That's been fantastic. It's almost as if there wasn't a gap in
it's not even like that. It's like it's even better than it used to be. And it's like, where the hell did this come from? Like the last few episodes have just been like nuts. It looks great. It's been super like interesting just to look at. Like after it finishes, I think we might have to actually just do a
Mushishi episode.
Yeah, because there's so much to talk about. Just like every little element. Like it'd be just interesting just to talk about a few episodes. Like there's just some really interesting things going on in these episodes, especially this season. Where there's just themes. They're just laying those themes on hard.
Yeah. And let's see. In terms of shows that we've dropped, essentially, you've dropped Captain Earth, right?
Yeah, I got bored as shit by Captain Earth.
Yeah. I'm still kind of watching it out of just inertia. Sometimes, like, I'll just do that. Like, I won't even like the show, but I'll just continue it just because I want to see. I just want to see where they go with it, whether it ever takes an interesting turn. I have no idea what's going on with it at this point. I don't know how to predict it. So that one's on my tentative. Just it's there because it's there and it's time to kill. I just watched a little bit of this. It's called like Selector Infected Wick Sauce or something like that.
Yeah,
and that one is interesting in that I think a lot of people were expecting it to be very kind of a Madoka, but for a card game. And what's interesting is whereas Madoka does the thing where it kind of reveals its kind of dark card a little bit later. This one is not afraid of showing it pretty early on.
See, well, I don't that kind of mindset though. I don't know if that's really like that astounding of a decision because like the thing people remember about Madoka is that it is dark. It has the dark element. The fact that it turns it on after a point or it reveals it after a point. I don't know how much that filters into how people reflect on it. They just go, oh. It was a dark magical girl for adults. That's it.
Well,
I think full stop. And then as people kind of they go, okay, let's do that.
Well, I think one of the things that helped it is the fact that people, when you come into it with a certain expectation and a certain framing, especially when you look at the way they did that opening for that show, it sets up the audience to view it in a certain way, and therefore kind of slowly revealing itself and kind of undercutting that. I think added to a lot of the power of that. And this one also is interesting because it does some really kind of interesting twists on a lot of it. I mean, first it's kind of like it's a card game anime, but the cast is almost entirely female, which is already a twist in itself. And I mean, usually the cast is, in those things is entirely male. And
for card games, yes, but it's a matter of audience because remember, there's an awful lot of
creepy people.
Who do you think is the target audience for this anime? It's spoilers. It's all 20-plus-year-old men. It is. Yes. It is what the audience is. I mean, and I don't think the fact like them having an all-female cast, targeted at this male audience, that's so astounding. It's like
yeah. But this one's interesting. It has like a lot of it's interesting. The way they develop the characters, I think, is pretty good. They are kind of very fucked up people, but the show kind of treats them as, no, this is fucked up. It's not treating it as a funny thing at all. Like it you know, it does have a little bit of we make fun of this, a lot where it has the whole like, oh, it's an incest thing. Whereas, and the reason it's made fun of a lot of anime is because the animes treat that as if that's a great thing or that's desirable.
Wait,
whereas
it's
in
a
this
fetishized thing, yeah.
yeah. Whereas in this one, it's like, no, this person's really, it's messed up, and there's kind of an angle to it that makes it kind of weird but interesting in a way. It's not playing it off as like a sexual fantasy thing. It is played as this character has a deep-seated emotional problem. Like, and that's why they behave this way. And the other characters don't react as, the comedic way a normal anime would treat it. So it's hitting a lot of these really strange themes in an odd way. And even a lot of the production design, the way the backgrounds are done, have this kind of a slight grunge look to them. So they don't have the idealized, clean city streets that you normally see in a lot of anime, and it kind of has a suppressive atmosphere around it. And also, even though it's a card game anime, it doesn't explain the rules at all, because it's not even about the mechanics of playing the game and things like that. It is entirely these characters coming up against each other and kind of psychologically battling each other. I mean, again, like the mechanics of it I don't think they're ever really explained.
Well, I mean, that's
like that's the thing.
Technically, that's true of like something like Yu-Gi-Oh as well. I mean, to the point of.
But that game, that thing's like
they made the card game. They made the card game after the fact. Keep in mind.
But then again, and the conflict in that though is the twists and turns of the battle itself. Whereas in this one, yes, they might do a certain action, but it's not really explained, and that's not where the tension is. The tension is actually outside of it, which is a lot more interesting, because the basic premise is that you're a person who gets a special card, and when you battle other people, and if you keep on winning, the wish you make will get granted. So everybody who's battling each other, they're doing it for the purpose of their dream. If you lose 3 times, you forget about everything. You don't remember anything about what the whole process was, or that you had the dream and things like that. And there are some really messed up consequences that happen as well, and I don't want to spoil it, but there are even more severe consequences to losing that get revealed. So, what might have been a thing about achieving dreams and things like that, it takes a much darker turn as these characters become very desperate to win and beat each other, because there's heavy consequences to not doing it. And it starts turning into, this strange dog eat dog fight that's very psychological. So I think there's something interesting in it. It might be good to kind of check out the first 3 or 4 episodes and see how that goes. But I decided just to check it out on a whim, and I was kind of surprised by it. I mean, I don't think it's an amazing show, but I think it's a lot more interesting than I think it's a lot more followable than Captain Earth was.
I might have to give that a look then.
I've used it as my replacement, so that's kind of one that I'm interested in checking out.
Yeah,
more.
Quick over why I abandoned Captain Earth, because I kind of talked up like my excitement for it. It's like it was just nothing happened, and I normally like the guys on there, Ikuhara and whatnot. It's like or is this one Enokido?
It's visually great, but
no, so this one's Enokido. I'm sorry. And it's like, I normally like it, and it looks visually great, and I like what they did with like Star Driver, and I certainly like what they did with Enokido on Utena, but it's like it's so up its own ass right now.
nothing's been explained.
It adds acronyms every 5 seconds, and just constantly it sounds, all this stuff we're saying, by the way, sounds like comedic. It's not. And it's like they build up all these.
It's just confusing.
They just build up all this sort of like emotional angst and stuff we have no connection or context for, and it's just like, oh god, just have some sort of payoff, It's like, and it's like we're 5 episodes in and we haven't even got him just like fighting in the robot and like winning stuff. It's just like you can't even give us the basic of the super robot stuff of like, okay, even if we don't understand what's going on, can we at least get like the sort of thing like, oh, he's got to win type stuff? It's like, oh, you're not even giving us that, huh? Really? Oh, we're not even gonna get the payoff of just like the most basic sort of stuff from a robot thing of, oh, robot fight, exciting. Are we going to lose robot fight? And it's like, no, we're not even getting that. And it's like, no, fuck.
Well, we don't
fuck
even know
this.
the consequences of it.
Yeah, you never
There's
have
no
any sort of stakes.
The stakes of the game, or why the things are important, and why the characters would feel the angst that they do. We don't understand any of that. We just have a general idea of something bad may or may not happen.
Yeah, and it doesn't make
that's it.
And the framework for it doesn't even make any sense because there's space aliens invading from while they're living on Earth. And it's like, what?
Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't.
It doesn't make any sense.
The show is so much more interested in trying to be mysterious, and it's like, oh, well, you don't know what this is yet. Well, you can only get strung along like that for so long before you just goddamn give up. I think that happened with Lost for a lot of people.
See, I that was also one that from a similar direction. I didn't really care too much for Penguin Drum for the similar reasons, and that was And that was Ikuhara was doing that one, and I didn't care for that much for similar reasons because that one also kind of got a little too full of its own metaphors, in its the visual symbolism got a little too heavy on that, and it's like I don't know, maybe that's just kind of what happens. Like Utena, maybe there's just been a one-off thing with these two guys, where it's like okay, when they're stuck going against each other in both directions, you get literally like basic perfection in terms of like that sort of storytelling where you have the heavy symbolism and like a lot of heavy imagery and stuff like that and the metaphors, and you just but while still having a grounded underlying character narrative to it. And it's like maybe that was just like a one-off thing since these two were working together, pushing in this along similar lines but in different directions. I don't know. It's like
I have no idea.
So every time we watch this stuff, it just makes me just like look back at Utena and just be like, oh, God, that was good. Now, remember Utena? That was great.
So, well, we'll see what happens with that. And also we'll see what happens with the new Sailor Moon that's going to be coming out. But this is kind of the current status of the seasons.
Yeah. Outside of anime, what are you watching?
Let's see. I think I don't make it. It's not like I have an appointment television. It's kind of hard, especially because I'm moving. So my days are kind of busy right now. But I watch Steven Universe. I've been checking out Clarence, which is pretty delightful. I don't think it's an amazing show. I think it's a good show. It just hasn't really hit me that much yet. But it's a pretty delightful little show. I think it has some interesting things going on for it. And that's also because it's a new show, so I have to kind of see where if it finds its legs soon. So besides that, in Steven Universe, there's of course Adventure Time, and television animation. Well, of course, Bob's Burgers. And
I've actually finally caught up completely with Bob's Burgers, and dang, there've been a lot of really good episodes lately.
Oh yeah,
they've been really pushing the boundaries, and like for some of these, it's also kind of like, dang, it's like they heard our like my little like niggling complaints, and it's like they've been addressing them completely. They're like, oh, bastards, you're making stuff so good.
And I'm glad that one's still going. So I'm not sure when the new season ends. I think it only has a couple more episodes of the new season before we hit the summer dead air time period, which is going to be really annoying.
How the hell? Real quick, make a little quick aside. I understand how the production works typically, where they have these seasons where they're producing, and then they have these spacings where they're trying to push things out while it's airing. How the fuck does Adventure Time work?
I think they just keep on getting new episode orders without,
and they just never stop
stopping.
It's because like the last season was like the length of the entire show.
Yeah, I mean,
it never stopped.
They were just given, I think, a very large episode order, and they just get to work straight through that.
Because the season cover was like aired over like 2 whole years.
And also each episode is like approximately 11 minutes versus a 20-something minute show. So the scripting and plotting for 24 minutes and not
the overhead's much less.
Flat.
Well, though to be fair, actually writing a episode or that is that length and actually feels weighty enough and interesting, I expect that must be difficult. I mean,
they both come with different difficulties, and again, it's a little bit difficult to kind of to quantify the length of it. But again, I think this last season was very long, and I also just see like Network renews Adventure Time they might renew it for multiple seasons at a time.
Yeah.
And that's happened for a couple shows.
Do it.
They'll renew it for multiple seasons, and so they just don't stop, and they just keep producing them. And sometimes networks will just hold on to some episodes for a while just so they can test out the waters with some new shows. So they'll just go like, oh, well, it's on break for now while they produce more, even though they already have more in the can. But they just want to, test out different shows in that time slot.
I'm fine with it. I'm glad that they do that sort of thing.
We'll see. Well, sometimes. Other times they'll just go, we're just going to do repeats because viewership declines in summer because everyone's outside.
Okay, yeah, I don't care for that at all. No, well, is that really?
That's just annoying.
Is that really how it happens?
That was a way of thinking. I think. Well,
because I would think
as
more
like people view television has changed. The idea of a lot of the TV scheduling has just gone out the window, but no one wants to admit it yet. Oh. But mid-season and summer replacement shows usually don't do very well, or they're the ones that the network doesn't have as much faith in. So they'll have them premiere in the summer, so that way they don't even get the show a fair shot. They're like, we have this, we spent money on it. I don't think it's going to do that well. Let's just throw it on in summer, and that's usually when they'll often do that, which is kind of annoying. Because summer's often time for students when they have nothing to do. So I don't know. It's strange. We'll see. And again, I think the concept of scheduling has really changed a lot as people now watch things on demand and download and streaming and things like that. So there's a lot of changes.
Yeah, and it looks. I don't know how well some of these studios are capitalizing on it properly. Like, there's not necessarily good ways to legally catch these shows out of cycle.
Yeah, and it's difficult. Well, they made it better. So places like Hulu and some of the networks themselves will put the episode up the next day. Like
True.
NBC's very good with that, where the next day you can watch the new episode, and all you have to do is just sit through some commercials, and that's it.
Yeah,
that's a nice way of monetizing it and making it so that way the incentive to, I have to wait a whole week or a month to be able to legally watch the show online. People are going to instead go to a torrent site within the hour to do it, whereas you could just legally do it within the next day. That's not as much of a barrier to convenience. Yeah. So people always take the path of least resistance, and a lot of the networks trying to put them behind all these different walls and services,
and rather than trying to fight it, you should take advantage of it.
Yeah, I think putting them up immediately and just making people sit through a couple commercials, that's fine. I think people will do that just because convenience-wise, they'd rather sit through a commercial than have to deal with the other stuff.
Yep.
But we'll see. Networks just got a bit of catching up to do. All right, so this has been another episode of Animation Dissection. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Feel free to tweet us or ask questions or have suggestions. You can reach me on Twitter at RYMagnuson, and you can reach Zorak at SAZorak. So just feel free to hit either of us up with questions or comments.
Sander Schwartz is president of animation at Warner Brothers.
This is just a further evolution of the characters with a concerted effort to make them contemporary, hip and cool to today's kids.